Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with here today with an article from the Daily Wire. Doesn't actually give the date, but I think from the time you're going to listen to this is probably within the last week or so. But anyway, it is by Matt Walsh. I'm sure a lot of you know who he is. It's called "The Military is Collapsing Under the Weight of Its Own Wokeness." And I've talked about stuff like in the area of this before, where it's just like the competency crisis is upon us with things, and this is kind of is in that same vein, so I figured this would be worth going over as well. So let's go ahead and just dive right in, shall we? It says in October 2020, Major General Ed Thomas, who at the time was the commander of the Air Force Recruiting Service, wrote an op ed for Yahoo News. It was entitled 86% of Air Force pilots are white men. Here's why this needs to change. So nothing like an Air Force was that Major General going all racist on everybody. It says in about 800 words, Major General Thomas outlined his plan to recruit pilots without regard for their competence or fitness or loyalty to the United States. Instead, Thomas explained, the most important thing for the Air Force to focus on was the skin color of its recruits. He said that hiring more black and brown recruits was vital in order to keep peace with Russia and China, because that's what they're concerned about, in Russia and China is just, yeah, if you guys just didn't have as many white people in your armed forces, things might be better. Because that makes sense. Says they're busy developing hypersonic missiles that can fly at 20 times the speed of sound, the general wrote, but we've got our secret sauce that will keep us competitive. And that secret sauce, as he described it, is diversity. As according to Ed Thomas, our goal is to get in front of every demographic group in America and show them someone who wears a flight suit every day they can look up to and say, that could be me. Well, you can do that with literally anybody, regardless of your skin color. Okay. I mean, you don't need to see someone who looks like you. That's called narcissism. Okay. I mean, again, I've said this in other videos before, like that I loved baseball growing up. I played baseball for a couple of decades and softball for 6 more years after that. And like most of my baseball heroes growing up were African American men. And it never struck me that they were. And they were still my heroes and still are some of my heroes today. Okay, like I've said, Leon Durham, first baseman for the Cubs, back in 1984, which is kind of the first year I remember any sort of sports anything. I remember the NLCS between the Cubs and the Padres, and then when Andre Dawson came to the Cubs, stuff like that. So again, I'm using a sports analogy to describe this, but still, you know, I always looked at least Leon Durham and I was like, I want to do that, and it didn't matter that he was black. I don't give a shit. I never have. It's just I want to do that. Okay, and that's how things should be. No one should have to look like I shouldn't be like, well, I can't play first base because Leon Durham's there. But then when Mark Grace takes over, who is white, for those of you that don't know, I go, oh, now I can see myself in the like. Okay, what that's called racism. Okay. Says 3 years after he wrote that op-ed and launched the Air Force's anti-white recruitment plan, Major General Ed Thomas retired. He inflicted his DEI recruitment strategy on the Air Force, and then he left. So he doesn't have any reason to care about the consequences. But especially as World War III seems more plausible by the day, the rest of us have an important question to ask, which is, how did this DEI strategy turn out exactly? And I've already read this article, so I'm going to tell you, and you probably have guessed already, that it's not good. This Thomas's replacement, a general named Christopher Ungerheim, and I'm probably butchering that, to testify this month before the Senate Armed Services Committee. He informed Congress that for the first time in 24 years, the Air Force has failed to meet its recruitment goal. Once again, for the first time in more than 2 decades, the Air Force didn't hit its recruiting objective. It was off by around 10%, and they're not alone. Ammerline went on to testify that the Army and Navy, which also put a new emphasis on recruiting minority candidates, also fell far short of their projections in the most recent fiscal year, which ended in September. He testified that we've seen a steady decline in the military even being an option for our youth as they contemplate the future. Because if you crunch the numbers, you'll find that's an understatement. In total, the military missed its recruitment goal by more than 40,000 individuals. And the Army now has 450,000 active duty soldiers, its smallest size since 1940, before the U.S. entered World War II. In all, the U.S. military currently has around 1.4 million active service members. By comparison, China's military has more than 2 million. All right, let's keep going here. There we go. It says, as alarming as all those statistics are, the news gets even worse when you consider the quality of the few people who are signing up to serve this country. And this is part of the thing coming up right here is part of the reason I wanted to talk about this as well, is that you're seeing these military TikToks going around. People are just shitting on everything that they have to do. And it's kind of like, you should have known that this was going to be a thing when you went in. But anyway, it says the Daily Mail reported this week on what it calls a TikTok mutiny among recruits who are increasingly posting videos online to complain about the conditions they're shocked to encounter in the military. These are soldiers who are in uniform, often recording themselves inside U.S. military bases, which is someone tell me, is that illegal? I kind of feel like that's illegal, or at least against the rules. But anyway, it says they're whining that the pay is bad and the food isn't up to their standards. And here are just a couple of those videos, and you can go ahead and click on play on those. I'm not going to play them right now. But yeah, they're what you think. And again, it's like, well, what did you expect when you were getting into the military? You were going to be staying in like a hotel and be pampered and have like, filet mignon given to you every day? No, it's crap, and it's kind of meant to be. But anyway, it says you'll notice that nowhere in those TikToks do any of these soldiers talk about the pride in their country, or their family's history of service, or their desire to ensure a safe and prosperous world for their grandchildren. They don't talk about any of that because none of it applies to them. A recent Gallup or poll by Gallup found that only 1 in 10 young liberals were extremely proud in their country, and since most young people are liberal, this is what you get. Yep. That's unfortunate. You see, a lot of folks too on the conservative side have just decided they're not going to go and do this anymore, even though their family has like, you know, fathers or mothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews all serve. That they're just like, I'm not doing it because of what's going on. So you're losing all these generational people who are true patriots to people that just don't care. So on the bright side, it's a diverse group of soldiers in these clips. There's no denying that. So there's at least one objective that our Pentagon has successfully completed. Unfortunately, all of these diverse recruits are saying pretty much the same thing. They're not making enough money. They're not getting enough respect. They can't see their family as often as they'd like, and so on. And yet again, I come back to, well, what were you thinking was going to happen? It's not a high paying job, okay, until you I think you get like, to become an officer or something. So, or maybe even a little less. I don't know. It's not me. It just feels like that to me. So they're not getting enough respect. Well, again, it's the military. Like you need to earn it. Okay. You don't just get it. Okay. That's not how just life works. And they can't see their family as often as they'd like. Again, what were you expecting? Okay. Says, of course, all of those complaints have always applied to life in the military. That's 100% correct, since the food has never been five-star quality and the pay has always been abysmal. The difference is that now we're filling the ranks with the sorts of people who would not only whine about it, but whine publicly in uniform for clicks. These are the kind of recruits we're told will help us defeat China and their hypersonic missiles, which is an utterly laughable thing. So this is what equity looks like in the armed forces, and no one's allowed to point out what a disaster it's been. Says the issue, however, isn't just diverse recruitment efforts and TikToks. There are much deeper problems with the military's leadership, and a handful of recent incidents gives us clues as to what they are. So even before that, I go into what that is. I've seen a number of folks that I follow on Twitter that are former military that say like they need to just essentially purge all the officers essentially from like a certain grade upwards. Like just they need to just be fired essentially. So I mean that's a sentiment shared by quite a few of those people. It's not like just one person saying it. So I guess the military leadership is, from what I understand, fairly woke and somewhat anti-America, which is, I would say, a bit of a problem. Says last December, the Washington Times reported that the Defense Department launched an investigation into two Army soldiers who took sexually explicit photos in uniform while wearing dog masks and bondage gear, because, that's what you want in your armed forces. Some of those photos were apparently taken on an airfield, as well as inside a locker room with nameplates for Joint Base Pearl Harbor. Nothing ever came of that investigation, as far as Matt Walsh can tell. The military just buried it. Says that same month, a high-ranking commander in New Jersey named Chris Schilling, who was stationed at Joint Base McGuire Dix Lakehurst, threatened the mother on Facebook because she complained about gay propaganda that her 7-year-old daughter was learning at school. Here's what the mother, Angela Reading, wrote on Facebook. Quote, why are elementary schools promoting / allowing elementary kids to research topics of sexuality? How can my young children be accepting of people who are sexually attracted to multiple genders if they don't know what sex is? End quote. Her post continued along those lines. At no point did she threaten anyone. But in response, Chris Schilling wrote this, quote, the Joint Base leadership takes this situation very seriously and from the beginning have had the security forces working with multiple state and law enforcement agencies to monitor the situation to ensure the continued safety of the entire community. So she basically said, end quote, I should say. So she essentially said, my kids are being shown, prawn, to use an internet lingo, in school. And she's saying, I don't like that. And this guy's like, well, we're going to call basically, we're going to call all the police to investigate this woman because she doesn't like that my kids are being shown inappropriate material. Okay. dude, your priorities are completely backwards. It says in this case, the military never explained why Chris Schilling was posting publicly on behalf of a military base and intimidating a mother who was expressing her views on social media. They certainly didn't publicly fire Chris Schilling, who would have been the obviously appropriate, which I should say would have been the obviously appropriate response. And again, they buried the story. Yeah, he should have been fired for that, but whatever. Says each of these incidents, as egregious as they are, point to the transformation of the U.S. military from a fighting force into a political tool. Their goal is now the same as the goal of every federal agency under the Biden administration, which is to promote a perverse cult and root out any non believers. That's why 3 years ago, the Pentagon commenced a political purge that was thinly veiled as a COVID mandate. And I'm sure because I said that word right there, I'm going to have a little Wikipedia thing at the bottom of this video. So if you do see this after it premieres, let me know if that popped up. I'm just kind of curious about if there's going to be like that sort of community note sort of thing, it's totally unnecessary. It says in just the past few years, more than 8,000 military service members were discharged for refusing to take the COVID shot. Only around 40 of those service members ever returned. Geez, only 40 out of 8,000? Okay, even though I read this article before, I just didn't connect that. Wow, okay. It says they're mostly gone for good. Yeah, I mean, what were you expecting? Like basically their country said, "We don't want you here," and they left. Now they're like, "Oh wait, we totally need you guys." And what do you think they're going to be like? "Oh, okay, well, since you said you're sorry, we'll come back." No, they're going to feel betrayed, and they're not coming back except for those 40 people. Says this is all over a shot that didn't work as advertised, and it was never important for young, healthy people, the kind of people you want joining the military. But the military kicked out 8,000 service members anyway, because the point wasn't really to keep service members from dying of COVID. It was to punish people with the wrong political views. Yep, that's 100% correct. Totally on that. It says now the only people who want to sign up are lazy and entitled. Yeah, and that's why you're seeing the entitlement, especially, is what you're seeing on those TikToks. So it's easy to make this commentary into a commentary on Generation Z. So to some extent, it is a commentary on them, but it's more a commentary on our institutions that have created people like this and a military like this. The biggest problem for the military right now, and it is a very major problem, is that they are not only light in numbers, but the quality of the recruits they're bringing in. It used to be that the military would actively recruit young men and call them to come and sacrifice themselves in defense of their country. They were looking for men who could kill the enemy, and they didn't hide from that fact. Full Metal Jacket is a fictional film, but by all accounts, its depiction of Marine Corps boot camp 50 years ago isn't too far from accurate. In one iconic scene, the drill sergeant tells recruits that they need to become killers and gives Charles Whitman and Lee Harvey Oswald as examples of effective Marine Corps assassins. That's not the kind of speech we would want drill sergeants giving in reality. Mass murderers aren't the best role models. But the point is that the military didn't used to hide from the fact that it was calling men to violence for a good cause in service to their country. Yeah, and I even remember in high school, I think it was in a sociology class, like my senior year, that we actually watched the first half of Full Metal Jacket. And for those of you that haven't seen it, the first half of the movie is basically this boot camp. Uh, I don't want to say scene, boot camp section. The other half of the movie is like the actual them in Vietnam. But the guy came in, and someone in the class asked the guy, and it may have even been me, I just don't remember, but someone in the class asked the guy, like, is it still that way today? And the guy said it's actually worse. He said, well, back then, they couldn't, or they could hit you, and even though now they can't hit you, he said the verbal abuse is just insane. But he said he actually would say it is worse than what it was in Full Metal Jacket. And keep in mind that when this happened, my senior year of high school was 1995, 96. So this is, 27, 28 years ago that he was saying this. So just to let you know, it says you see here three things that are now missing from the way the military recruits and trains people. They used to look for one, men who were two, motivated by ideals like patriotism, and were three, eager and willing to kill the bad guys. So the military's current recruitment strategy avoids all of that. Now they put out recruitment ads that look like Disney movies or the kinds of videos you might see in a corporate HR seminar. Here, for example, is one recruitment ad from the Army. It specifically targets women who are motivated not by patriotism but by narcissism. And if you haven't seen this, I saw this when it came out. It was played on some other channels that I follow, and it's just yeah, it's like would this really make you go and join the army? And the answer is probably not. In fact, it might actively keep you away from joining the army. And meanwhile, this ad was juxtaposed with one that Russia put out, and one that China put out, which were basically like what you would expect to see from an armed forces ad. And then you play ours next to it, and it's like just this beta sort of, like it says here, narcissism sort of thing. So this is a strong and independent woman raised by two lesbians to become a left-wing social justice activist who grows up, gets hired by the army, and then starts bossing men around. And that's essentially what that ad right here is this first sentence right here. Okay, that just summed it up for you. So she doesn't want to serve her country. She wants to use her job in the army to impress her sorority sisters. This is the kind of person the military has been targeting. Contrast that with military recruitment ads back in 1940, the last time an army was so depleted, which is just prior to, a certain thing that happened. It says, watch how the military used to recruit. We're not going to play that now. It says they're focused on skills and competence. They're talking about how recruits can contribute to the military. They don't show them cartoons about impressing their sorority sisters. Because now all that's changed, and it's not like just the Army that's been trying to remove all hints of masculinity from its ranks. As Matt Gates pointed out this year, Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana recently hosted a drag queen story hour, because nothing says macho armed forces like drag queen story hour. So did Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada and Joint Base Langley in Virginia. This year, amid all the scrutiny, the Pentagon recently announced that the Navy has suspended its formal drag queen events. Well, God, at least the Navy has some common sense. It says, behold, maybe the single most depressing and unintentionally hilarious news conference ever delivered by the Department of Defense. And it says the Navy now says its pilot drag queen influencer campaign has concluded. Like, wow, that was even a thing. And man, she has crazy eyes too. Says, so the drag queen initiative has been suspended, says the Pentagon lady, but the military never apologized for it. They never reacted with horror that this was going on. Instead, they've done what they've been doing the past few years. They buried it, admitted no fault, and kept on doing it. His lowering standards and filling the military with cultists who hate this country is not the solution to low recruitment. Everyone knows that. The solution to low recruitment is to apologize for firing soldiers because they won't take an experimental shot. It's to reinstate all of those soldiers with back pay immediately, and then fire any officer who had any involvement in that decision, including Lloyd Austin, who is the Secretary of Defense, and I agree with that wholeheartedly as well. It says, and then the Pentagon needs to repudiate the testimony of former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Mark Milley, who repeatedly lectured soldiers about white rage. Instead of pretending that white supremacy is the biggest threat we face, which it is in no way, shape, or form even like an inkling of the biggest threat we face, says in making cartoon recruitment videos for narcissistic girl bosses, the Pentagon should do what it used to do, which is reward merit and character. Most of all, if you want to solve your recruitment problem, you need to speak to men specifically and call them to service using language that evokes higher ideals like patriotism and courage and loyalty. And then you need to turn it back rather, into a place tailor-made for men like that. So under the current administration, of course, the military will do precisely none of that. That's because at the very highest levels, the Biden administration doesn't believe this country or its values are worth defending. The end result is the crisis that the military currently faces, and it is indeed a crisis, but it's a crisis of their own making. So, yeah, fully, I agree with basically everything that Matt Walsh wrote in this, and it's kind of scary to think of. So, let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.